Before we get started, I wanted to give a quick shout out to a couple other history podcasts. If you love history, give these other shows a listen as well. Obscure History, a weekly dive into the dusty and neglected corners of our past to find the more interesting stories you should know, but don't. Deep into History, an exciting podcast that takes you deep into history's greatest moments. Find these great shows and more wherever you get your podcasts. Hello and thank you for joining us for another episode of Keepsake. If you like the show, please remember to subscribe for future episodes. Also help more people find us by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find us on Twitter @Keepsake Podcast. And be sure to tell your friends about the show. Welcome to Keepsake, a podcast exploring history in the world around us, taking ordinary objects and telling the extraordinary stories they remind us of. I'm your host, Corey Greiner. This week's item, a whiskey bottle. There are 97 words on the back of this bottle of 100 proof Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey. 97 words to sum up the whiskey itself and the man it's named after. It reads like a sort of eulogy highlight reel, announcing his numerous endeavors, achievements, and successes. He definitely sounds like a man who deserves to be remembered. And here he is with his name on a bottle of bourbon. There are more than a handful of bourbons named after people. Usually they are the founders of the distilleries or had something to do with the spirit being made. This is not one of those bourbons and not one of those men. It's not even clear if this man favored the famous Kentucky libation. He was a Texas man, after all, though born in Illinois. These 97 words tell us he was a cowboy and a cattle driver, that he was a lawman and a businessman. But he was also many other things in his 93 years of life. And these 97 words, they can only tell us some of who this man was. Paint a picture of him to accompany the crude image of him printed on the label. It's a stencil-styled portrait. He looks gruff, perhaps angry even. The photo it's based off of is from when he was a young man, just 24. A photo taken around the time he gained notoriety as the Texas Ranger, leading a group of men that rescued a woman kidnapped by a band of Comanche Indians. He was a hero, and now today his name is on a bottle of bourbon. These 97 words tell us about the trail he forged with his partner, driving thousands of cattle from Texas to Colorado and eventually to Wyoming. They tell us how the trail still bears their names to this day, just like this bottle of bourbon. And there's a town too which bears his name. It sprung up around his home, the first ranch to be settled in the Texas Panhandle. When a railroad stop was put in, the town grew and so did his contributions. Soon the town had a post office, a church, a school, even a college. Some of those places carried the namesake of the town and the man from which it came from, a namesake now shared with this bottle of bourbon. But not all of that is told to us in these 97 words. They also don't tell us of his days as a scout for the Confederate Army, eventually ascending to the rank of colonel. Away from the fighting of the war, but still fighting off the attacks of the native peoples. They don't tell us about how he kept a herd of native plains bison to try and prevent the species from being completely wiped out. Descendants of this herd which are still alive to this day, a day in which he also has a bourbon named after him. And what a way to remember a man that in 1955 was inducted into the Hall of Great Westerners in the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum. A man with a statue outside the Panhandle Plains Historical Museum. A man whose cattle driving days inspired the Lonesome Dove series of novels that were later adapted for television. Then again, since they changed his name, most people probably don't even realize that. But what does that really matter when your name is on a bottle of bourbon? What does it matter that over the years this man's name has been largely forgotten? The man that inspired stories, from a series of books, to this story here, to the 97 words on the back of a bottle of bourbon. A bourbon like the man few even know exists. A small batch whiskey for a man once larger than life. A man that did so much but died with so little. But those 97 words don't mention that. They make no mention that the town named after him is nothing but a ghost town these days. No mention of his wife, Mary Ann Dyer, or their 55 years of marriage, which ended when she became sick and died. They don't mention that, even though the elderly man did remarry, he never had any children. No one to carry on his legacy. But he did get his name on a bottle of bourbon. And then one day, a young man sees a bottle sitting on the bottom shelf of a liquor store. He sees the label and reads the 97 words on the back of it. This young man shares those words and that whiskey with a group of his friends. They are intrigued by the bourbon and the character presented on the bottle. His name is now spoken on new lips and in new ways. A new legacy born from this spirit. Because of this bourbon and those mere 97 words, more people may discover who this man was. This legend of the West, once lost, is now found again in the most unlikely of places. And while there is so much more to this man than what these 970 words can say, perhaps we only need these final 97. Colonel Charles Goodnight was a force to be reckoned with when the West was still being won. As an iconic cowboy, he blazed the historic Goodnight-loving trail from Texas to Colorado, driving scores of cattle thousands of miles over dusty plains and snow-packed passes. As a Texas Ranger lawman, he doled out vigilante justice to protect ranchers from rustlers and outlaws. But Goodnight had a head for commerce too, building towns as well as businesses. This premium small batch bourbon harnesses the unique character of this legendary man. Unflappable, unforgettable, and one of a kind. Today's episode was written by me, Corey Greiner. Keepsake is produced and edited by Alex Holscher. If you have an idea you'd like us to explore on the show, send us an email at keepsakepod@gmail.com. Or find us on Twitter @KeepsakePodcast. If you want to hear more episodes, make sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review. This is an independently produced podcast, and reviews are the best way for us to gain more listeners, which will help us produce more episodes. And finally, next episode's item, a map. This has been Keepsake. Thanks for listening.